Hey guys, the information about the Euphoria updates for version 3.4 came to life. There is a lot to unpack here, and we're not gonna just read those off, but we're also gonna break them down a little bit. So let's start off with Tooth Fairy right away. She now has Eureka, and whenever an ally would consume Eureka, she accumulates points of inspiration, aka she's now an impromptu character. Then her insight effects got changed. Let's take a look at what her insight looked previously. Right here, it says that when entering battle, we instantly gain 3 baby tooth. When any team member now would actively cast an incantation, we collect an additional baby tooth. At the start of the round, we consume these baby tooth to not only reduce the enemy's team's critical resistance and critical defense by a certain amount, but also heal our team. Okay, now her insight is changed a little bit. Let's break it down. You not only gain these baby tooth by your allies actively using incantations. You don't do that anymore. Now you obtain the baby tooth by your allies consuming a certain amount of Eureka. Additionally, each consumed baby tooth, which you do at the start of every single round, increases the damage dealt by the first several impromptu incantations this round, while you still inflict the bad tooth, of course, onto all of your enemies. And her insight 3, the healing part of this insight, now accumulates additional inspiration for impromptu incantations as well. Alright, let's say this in a very convenient way. What does that mean? Now, whenever your allies consume Eureka, you gain a buff. You can stack this buff up to a certain amount of times. Now, at the start of every round, you consume stacks of these buffs. Each consumed stack of this buff heals your entire team, decreases the critical resistance and critical defense from all of your enemies, and it accumulates points of inspiration, plus it makes the first several impromptu incantations this round deal additional damage. Then her rank 2 Euphoria update says that Empty Gums, this is her incantation number 2, this one right here, which would inflict confusion and deal a little bit of mental damage, right? Okay. Now, this incantation number 2 no longer inflicts confusion. This is changed to AP +1 instead. Much better. And after attacking, you consume several Eureka to increase the number of impromptu incantations this turn. Her rank 3 Euphoria update says that her incantation number 1, her healing ability, now consumes Eureka to increase the damage dealt by impromptu incantations. So yeah, you can already see that you want to play Tooth Fairy actively, not only to accumulate Moxie, more onto that in just a second, but also to grant your team AP +1, to increase the number of impromptu incantations attacks this round with her incantation number 2, and her incantation number 1 heals you, and it increases the damage of impromptu incantations this round. So you would want to use both incantations in the same term if possible every 2 rounds if you have her P1. Okay, that was a little bit of a spoiler, but there you go. Now her rank 4 Euphoria says that her ultimate gains a new effect. After using your ultimate, you accumulate additional points of inspiration. You inflict a new debuff onto the target that you use this ultimate on. Your ultimate hits one target, and this target is now inflicted with a debuff called Neuralgia. And here is where things get absolutely fantastic, because what this Neuralgia debuff does is the following. After each impromptu incantation's attack, the holder takes Genesis damage equal to a certain percentage of the total damage dealt by that impromptu incantation attacked. This is stats up, or any buffs that your opponent has are negated and don't count. This can trigger a certain number of times, and only one neuralgia debuff can exist at a time. Okay, there's a lot to unpack with this kind of debuff. This is what makes this completely insane. Look, Tooth Fairy is gonna be played together with Paper Heron, Alan Lee, and Regulus. That is gonna be the impromptu team. That is confirmed. We don't need Aleph. Aleph would be overkill, because we don't need two characters that apply AP +1, and we already accumulate more than enough inspiration. We don't need Aleph's ultimate, so we can save him for the other impromptu lineup. Okay, now with Paper Heron and Anna Lee, and also Tooth Fairy does the same thing as well. These characters accumulate a absurd amount of inspiration. The more inspiration you accumulate, the more impromptu attacks will happen at the end of the round. And each and every one of those impromptu attacks now, with the debuff from Tooth Fairy's ultimate, they deal additional Genesis damage. That is absolutely ridiculous. Okay, now here is why you play Regulus or Voyager. Because this debuff is only afflicted onto one target. It can only exist once, right, on the battlefield. You cannot have this neuralgia debuff twice. So you want all of your impromptu incantations at the end of the round to hit only the target where this neuralgia debuff is afflicted upon. And in order for you to accomplish exactly that, you need the ultimate from Voyager or Regulus. Otherwise, your impromptu incantations would spread out and not hit the intended target. They would not hit only the target with this neuralgia debuff on. That's why you play Regulus and Voyager. And yeah, I mean, it is absurd. Trust me, this is completely overpowered. That was Tooth Fairy's Euphoria update that will happen in version 3.4. Now, her portraits also see a rework to benefit this Euphoria update even more. Her portrait number 1 says that your mental damage is increased, and your incantation number 2, the debuff incantation, now grants you AP +1, right? It would only do so for one turn. With this portrait number 1, you increase that to 2 turns. We already see this with Flutterpage and Aleph, so nothing new here, but a very, very, very good portrait number 1. Needless to explain. Her portrait number 2 says that the critical resistance rate and critical defense reduction from your bad tooths is increased in duration. Your bad tooth maximum stack limit is increased, and the more baby tooths you consume, the more and more you increase the damage of your impromptu incantations. Then the neuralgia debuff from your ultimate, the trigger count increases and the damage per trigger also increases. This P2 turns her into an absolute berserker, because look, the neuralgia debuff from your ultimate, that is what makes this Euphoria update absolutely absurdly broken. You know, really, it is broken as fuck. And the portrait number 2 increases every single time you hit an enemy, you deal increased damage. That is so incredible, right? It's already busted, and with this portrait number 2, you make this even more busted. So P2 portrait, Tooth Fairy is ridiculous. Okay, then let's calm down a little bit and check her portrait number 3. Your incantation number 2's mental damage at different incantation ranks further increases. Your insight effects for every several baby tooth consumed, the damage increases. For the first several impromptu incantations this round is enhanced. More damage, more damage, more damage, more damage, right? But yeah, P2 is the true juicer, spoiler alert. Then here, her portrait number 4 says that you heal your incantation number 1 at different incantation ranks. Now recovers HP for all allies, and that amount is increased, of course, to a higher percentage of the caster's attack. In inside effects, for every several baby tooth consumed, the additional for every several baby tooth consumed, the additional inspiration accumulated for impromptu incantations this round is increased. So, my god, they phrased this here in such a weird way. It is simply, you use your incantation number 1, you heal more based on how high your attack is, and you accumulate additional inspiration. That's it. Then her portrait number 5 says that the bad tooth's critical resistance rate and critical defense reduction effect is further increased. The number of baby tooths you consume, it increases your impromptu incantations damage further. And now the neuralgia debuff from your ultimate trigger count is increased again, and you deal even more damage. So this P5 is an enhancement to her absurdly busted portrait number 2, right? So yeah, P5 Tooth Fairy is on a whole different level. It's a whole different beast. But if you go for portraits for Tooth Fairy, you can stop at either portrait number 1, or if you could even somehow manage to get portrait number 2, that would be the ultimate true juicer. And that's about it when it comes to Tooth Fairy. Then moving on to the character 6. His Euphoria update number 1 says the following. Insight effect and disciplines collection of debuffs inflicted to targets is replaced with better debuffs. Let me show you this. Look, his insight says that before your ultimate takes effect, you apply 2 debuffs out of a whole plethora of selection of debuffs. 2 random debuffs out of this selection are applied to all of your opponents right before your ultimate takes effect. Additionally, you have your incantation number 2 called Discipline. Also apply 2 debuffs out of this collection, 2 random debuffs out of this collection onto 2 enemies, right? Okay, now the debuffs that you actually apply are better debuffs than they were before. Additionally, the incantation at different ranks increases the number of effects and the duration. So if you rank his incantation number 2 up, you would not inflict 2 random, but 3 random debuffs out of this collection onto your opponent. Cool, this is very, very important. And additionally, here comes why it is so important. If all types, every single debuff out of this collection is inflicted onto an opponent, you additionally inflict multiple stacks of poison and burn onto the target as well. I will explain things a little bit further once we are done with the whole Euphoria update. Now let's focus on the rank 2 Euphoria update. It does the exact same thing as the rank 1, but for his incantation number 1. Let me show you the incantation number 1 real quick. This is this one here. Yeah, you purify, right? You cleanse 2 debuffs from the ally that you use this on. And you grant him buffs. 2 random buffs out of a selection of buffs are randomly applied to the ally that you would use this incantation number 1 onto. Okay, now you guessed it, the buffs that you apply via this incantation number 1 are now better buffs than they were before. And you also can rank this incantation up to increase the number of buffs that you apply. You don't apply 2 random, but now 3 or maybe even 4 random buffs onto the target that you use this incantation number 1 onto. And if the target that you use this incantation number 1 on already has the entire collection of buffs present onto him, you grant him Empower incantation number 1 automatically. So his incantations will rank up by 1 for the next turn or even multiple turns, right? So you rank up your allies' incantation with this, but you have to use this incantation multiple times onto the same target for these effects to take place, of course. That is what you have to keep in mind. Okay, before we break this down even further, let's take a look at his rank 3 and rank 4 Euphoria updates here. Rank 3 says that his ultimate is now changed to require more Moxie to cast. You don't need 5 Moxie anymore to cast your ultimate, but you need at least 6. See what they did there. Cool. That of course leads to new effects that say your Moxie cap is of course increased, right? Otherwise you would never be able to cast your ultimate. So you can have more Moxie than just 5. And at the end of every single round, you just gain a Moxie for free. Okay. Then his rank number 4 Euphoria update says that your ultimate will deal additional mental damage. And something else. You could raise the mental damage of this ultimate to a cap. It was capped. You could not deal more than, let's say, for example's sake, right? The ultimate deals 700% mental damage. Now this is of course increased, but depending on how many debuffs your opponent already has onto him. And the more debuffs are inflicted onto the opponent that you use this ultimate on, the more damage this ultimate will deal. And the increase here was capped at, let's say for example's sake again, 1000. That cap is raised. You can now, let's say, right, previously you could have 5 debuffs afflicted onto the enemy, and that was it. If you had like 6, 7, 8 debuffs afflicted onto the opponent, your ultimate would not count these debuffs to increase his damage output. The damage output was capped at 5 debuffs. That cap is now raised, so your ultimate not only does more flat damage, but has a higher ceiling when it comes to how much damage it could actually deal. So you want to apply the additional poison and burn stacks onto the target, because if you do that, your ultimate will deal more damage, right? That was previously not the case. Okay, so what does all of this mean? Where is 6 played, and is he going to be viable? Yeah, he is very, very likely to be viable. Now the problem is he does not have a best in slot in any team. That I can already tell you. You can play him together with Willow in a poison setup. You can play him in Afterglow because he also inflicts now burn, right? You could play him in rank up. That is not recommended. You should put him in the poison team together with Willow or in the Afterglow lineup because of the burn, right? You could also go the route of playing him together with like Noah, for example, but yeah, this is also not too recommended. The best way to play 6 is in the Afterglow lineup to replace Flutterpage. That is not me saying, hey, this guy is gonna be the best in slot for the Afterglow and he's gonna be better than Flutterpage in this team. No, that will not be the case. Flutterpage will still be better than 6 in the Afterglow lineup. It is just an option, right? And the same kind of thing goes for poison. You will probably be better off playing Willow, Tuesday and Jessica with Sotheby. I don't think 6 will be better than Jessica in the poison lineup, but you know, you could do that. You could put him into Willow, Tuesday, Sotheby and play him there instead of Jessica if you wanted to. And the same goes for the Afterglow lineup. You could play him in place of Flutterpage there to free up Flutterpage for the follow-up attack team that you will build together with Flutter Page, so that Flutter Page is not no longer occupied in this Afterglow lineup. Will he have a best in slot? I highly doubt that, unfortunately, but he's a versatile character that you can slot into multiple different teams. Okay, then next up we have Willow, and her rank 1 Euphoria update says that Hexbane gains a new effect. We all know what Hexbane is, I mean, come on, right? That says that poison damage taken is increased, and it is stackable, of course. When exceeding a stack limit, you prioritize removing stacks with the shorter remaining duration. A little bit of a quality of life update here, but nothing too crazy. Then her rank 2 Euphoria update says that the Ancient Ritual gains a new effect. At the end of the round, for every several stacks of Hexbane on the enemy with the most Hexbane stacks, you increase your Moxie for yourself. That, of course, is really good, because Willow is reliant on her ultimate. She wants to channel her ultimate non-stop. And this Euphoria update number 2 here grants her more Moxie, that unlocks her ultimate faster, quicker, more channeling, right? You get the point. Also, this is a direct buff, but yeah, for the most part, this is also just a quality of life update, if I'm being honest. Then her rank 3 Euphoria says that Hexbane now deals additional Genesis damage. And this is the kicker, right? This is what this Euphoria update is all about. How much more damage will Willow actually deal? And yeah, we will not be able to tell that yet. Then her rank 4 Euphoria says that the ending pose has a new effect. It also increases Moxie for yourself, and the Insight gets a new effect that says at the end of the round, if not an Ancient Ritual, you increase your Moxie. So you gain a whole bunch of Moxie for yourself. It makes Willow faster and of course therefore better, and it is a huge quality of life update, right? It makes her much more effective and faster. That is like really the true thing here, is speed. Okay, it all comes down to this rank 3 Euphoria update though, which increases her Genesis damage. The question here is, by how much? But I can already tell you, like, this is a Euphoria update that is pretty underwhelming. You might be able to tell this for yourself, of course. And this will not bring poison back into the meta. For poison to make it into the meta again, we need multiple other Euphoria updates. At least the one for Tuesday needs to be absolutely cracked, and even Sotheby also needs some help there. This is not gonna make the cut for poison. That is 100% guaranteed. Okay, now onto the most important Euphoria here by far, with Liang Yue. A lot of the metagame depends on this a little bit, and a lot of future planning also depends on this very Euphoria update. So this is by far the most important information. And if you're not familiar with how to play Liang or how she works, if you have never used her, then this will be way too complicated to understand. So let me give you a brief overview of things that you have to know here in order to understand better what we are about to talk about. Look, Liang Yue is all about using her ultimate to establish an array. This array cuts your hand in half, so to speak. There will be two different sides. The left hand side is going to be green and the right hand side is going to be red. Now, depending out of which side we use an incantation, we gain a certain buff. Let's say, or a stack I should say. Let's say we cast an incantation out of the left hand side, out of the green side. We not only enhance our incantation with something great, but we also get a buff called Justice Talon. If we use an incantation out of the right hand side, which is red, then we rank the incantation up that we use, and we grant ourselves a stack of peace. Okay, now we can gather a certain amount of those stacks. They will be counted together, and once we reach the maximum, we will cast a very strong follow-up attack. We have a choice here out of 3 follow-up attacks that we can cast, depending on how many stacks of what we have. Let's say we have more stacks of Justice, aka we casted more incantations out of the right hand side, out of the red side, right? Then we will perform a follow-up attack that deals a whole bunch of flat damage. If we have more incantations used out of the left hand green side, we gain stacks of peace. If we have more stacks of peace, once we reach the maximum amount of stacks, we cast a very strong follow-up attack as well, but that does not deal as much damage as the other follow-up attack, but we inflict a whole plethora of debuffs onto all of our enemies. Then if we reach the maximum amount of stacks and we have an equal amount of justice and peace stacks accumulated at that time, we cast a third follow-up attack called Balance, and this does also a huge chunk of damage and grants a whole plethora of profitable buffs to our allies. Okay, now how this plays out right now is you would only ever aim for this Balance follow-up attack if you have Liang Yue at P5. No one has that, right? So what we aim for mostly is always gaining more stacks out of peace, so that we inflict a whole plethora of debuffs onto our enemies. That is the playstyle with Liang Yue right now, or at least that is how you should play her. That is very, very important to know and to keep in mind when we uncover how this Euphoria update here works. Okay, let's start off with something tame and something that is not too complicated right out of the gate here. Her rank 1 Euphoria update says that when allies take extra actions, Liang Yue gains a certain number of stacks of Nuo Dance. Those last several rounds. Nuo Dance leads to all of the follow-up attacks that we just talked about to deal more damage, but also your incantation number 2 to deal more damage based on how high the number of stacks of Nuo Dance is. So you of course play her in a follow-up setup, that is needless to explain. Then her array no longer reduces damage taken. This is changed to it grants damage dealt increase and is additionally affected by incantation might. Keep that in mind. That is a very, very fantastic change, because all what matters for this Euphoria update here is that Liang Yue deals more damage, because the damage that Liang deals right now is pathetic, and that's why she is trash. So this Euphoria update needs to cater towards Liang dealing more damage, and this is already here a fantastic start. Then there's something interesting here. See, let me show you this. Look, the array, right? It says that the 3 leftmost incantations played from the spell dock gain +1 round of duration to a selection. The selection includes buffs, debuffs, counters, that kind of stuff. Now with this Euphoria update, force field effects are also in this selection, and then I also profit from this +1 duration. It's a little bit of a quality of life, nothing too crazy here. Then her rank number 2 Euphoria update is where things get crazy. Her rank 2 Euphoria update says that when casting the Justice follow-up attack, then the peace stacks will also be treated as Justice stacks. Why is that very, very important? Because remember, you got a Justice and peace stacks, and depending on how many stacks you have, once you reach the maximum, that dedicates which follow-up attack you actually use. And it is very, very important that you only go for 1 stack all the time, which limits you, because if you only go for Justice stacks, you can only play the incantations that are on the right hand side of your hand, of your spell dock, and that limits you in terms of the options that you have, because you can only use the incantations available to you in your hand from the right hand side. So your rotations here are very, very limited and kind of dictated. That now with this Euphoria update changes, because you can have as many peace stacks as you will, as you want, as long as you have more justice stacks once you reach the maximum amount of stacks. Because now all the peace stacks, they also count as justice stacks, which leads to you, if you use this justice follow-up attack, it will deal more and more damage the more and more justice stacks you have accumulated. But again, now you don't have to only accumulate justice stacks, so you don't only have to use the incantations from the right hand side of your hand, because the peace stacks from the left hand side of your hand also count as justice stacks. So you have way more freedom when it comes to what incantations you are allowed to use and how your rotation can look like. Alright, and this of course also counts for the peace follow-up attack. If you use the peace follow-up attack, then the justice stacks also count as peace stacks, right? You get the point. But there's way more to here, and it is actually freaking amazing. Look, I told you earlier as well that right now we only go for one of those follow-up attacks here anyways. We mostly go for the peace follow-up attack, unless we have a P5, then we will go for balance, right? So this now also changes, because look, if we use the justice follow-up attack, we increase our attack. If we use the peace follow-up attack, we reduce the damage taken reduction on our enemies. But if we use the balance follow-up attack, we grant ourselves incantation might. In addition, with the new gained freedom that we have, we are now incentivized to use all three of those follow-up attacks. We increase our attack, we decrease the damage taken reduction, and we increase our incantation might. All three of these things will happen when we use all three of our follow-up attacks like once, right? We combine all of them. So with the new gained freedom that I told you about earlier, we are now able to do this and use all three of those follow-up attacks to gain all three of those beneficial effects for ourselves and inflict them onto our enemies. So very amazing. We gain freedom, we gain convenience. If you remember the kit for Chen Higuang, he makes this even more convenient for us. So damn, like absolutely freaking amazing. And also here, when casting our follow-up attack, either of those, then each stack of Swift Resolve additionally increases the incantation might by a certain percentage. Fantastic. Swift Resolve is a buff that you gain by performing your balance follow-up attack, and what it does is you require one less stack of each like talent stack, either justice or peace, to actually perform your follow-up attack, and each of those stacks now grant you additional incantation might. So the balance follow-up attack is what you want to aim for first. That is the first follow-up attack you want to aim for, so you have to play it correctly and make it so that you have an equal amount of justice and peace stacks when you perform your first follow-up attack. Alright. I will of course make a guide of how to play Liang when she releases. That is gonna be a blast, I can already tell. Then her rank 3 Euphoria update says that her ultimate deals additional reality damage, and the array gains a new effect. That while the array is active, which it will by the way always be 100% of the time, then casting your incantation number 1 and number 2, you grant you several stacks of Nuo Dance. Let me remind you that Nuo Dance is a buff that you can stack, and per stack you increase your damage output from your incantation number 2 and from each and every one of your follow-up attacks. Okay, her rank number 4 Euphoria says that Liang Yue no longer gains her ultimate, but when Moxie reaches 5, she automatically casts her ultimate at the start of the round. While in this array, casting your ultimate again increases the duration of the immunity and the Guardian's Resolve stacks that now increase your damage output, by the way, granted to all allies. grants yourself several stacks of Swift Resolve as well now. Whoa, crazy buff. And increases this attack's incantation might. I mean, holy crap. There's so many damage stacking going on here. Liang Yue is gonna be out of control nuts. Okay, then your array gets an additional effect. It causes your incantation number 2 and your follow-up attacks to deal additional reality damage. There again, even more damage. Nuodance. When possessing multiple stacks of it, you let me read that again. Nuodance. When possessing multiple stacks of it, actively casting your incantation number 2 is treated as an extra action. When possessing more stacks of Nuodance, the additional reality damage from those stacks is doubled. You wanna stack this as fast as possible, so the effect is doubled. Hola shit, dude. And your incantation number 2 and your follow-up attacks are additionally affected by a certain percentage of incantation might. Yeah, that's why you want to stack incantation might, and you do so by performing your balance follow-up attack. Okay, that's very, very important. And that's about it for the Liang Euphoria update. Oh my goodness gracious. I can tell you without knowing the numbers or without seeing it in action, that is gonna be meta. And if you want to play follow-up, I don't know where it will stand exactly in the meta. Like, honestly, it has the potential to become rank number 4, right? We will have Blood Tide, Dynamo, we will have the new impromptu lineup with Paper Heron and Anali and the 2 Fairy with Regulus. And yeah, then this follow-up attack team here with Liang Yue and Chen Higuang has very high potential to take the spot number 4, if I'm being honest. So, oh my god, like, be ready for version 3.4. Save up everything that you can. Of course, now with all of this information, we will talk more about it. I will make a new tier list, I will make a pull plan coming up, and everything that comes to my mind. We will talk about this much more in my upcoming videos, of course. But whoa, that was a lot to unpack. That was quite complicated. And yeah, now let's take a break and call it a day. I hope this video was fun and informative, guys. If you like Reverse1999 content in general, please consider leaving a follow on my channel. I would really appreciate it. But until next time, take care of yourselves, have a great day, and we love this game.